At my 40th birthday party, I watched my husband raise a glass, only to toast his affair with my best friend. 30 people clapped. I didn't cry. I walked out, and made sure that night would haunt them for the rest of their lives. If you've ever tasted betrayal, and dreamed of turning pain into power, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, like this video, and join us as we unfold the quietest, most devastating revenge you've ever heard. Trust me, you won't forget her name. The crystal flute in my hand trembled slightly as the soft chime of silverware tapping glass rang out through the candlelit terrace of Maravilla, my favorite coastal restaurant. 30 people turned their heads toward the sound, expecting the annual toast from my husband, Grant. I looked up, still smiling politely, the sea breeze brushing my collarbone where the diamond necklace he'd given me last year shimmered against my skin. This was supposed to be the kind of night I'd remember forever. My 40th birthday. Grant had promised something unforgettable. He kept that promise. Just, not the way I imagined. Grant stood slowly, holding his glass, and I instinctively reached for his hand, but he didn't offer it. His eyes weren't on me. They were on her. Lena Mercer. My best friend of 15 years. The woman who had helped plan every detail of this night, the guest list, the menu, the floral arrangements. My so-called sister in everything but blood. The woman who told me to wear the elegant black dress, because it brought out my eyes. Now I realized, she had dressed me for my own funeral. Before we raise a glass to another year in Vivienne's incredible life, Grant began, his voice rich but off-key, I need to say something. Something unexpected. There was a pause. A beat. The kind that freezes everything. The hair on my arms lifted. My mother's hand gently touched my shoulder behind me, the same way she had when I was a little girl bracing for bad news. My father sat up straighter. My sister murmured something I couldn't hear. Grant's voice trembled just slightly, but he steadied himself. Viv, he said, using the nickname only those closest to me knew, you've been a part of my life for so long. But sometimes, love finds us in places we never expect. My grip on the stem of my flute tightened. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Lena. And then she stepped forward. Lena. In an emerald green dress I helped her pick out 3 weeks ago, when she claimed she needed something special for a date. Her lips were painted in the same deep red she always wore when she wanted attention. And tonight, she had it. All of it. Grant continued. This hasn't been easy. But Lena and we've developed feelings. Strong ones. We never meant for it to happen, but the heart wants what it wants, Lena interrupted, her voice lilting like she was reading a line from a movie. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. It felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. Someone gasped. Probably my cousin Madeline, always dramatic. But what truly gutted me was the awkward, scattered laughter that followed. The clinking of nervous glasses. The forced smiles. I turned my head slowly and saw them, people who had watched me grow up. People who'd celebrated our wedding. Now watching this ambush as though it were a reality show. My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. That's enough, he growled. But I raised my hand. No, I said softly. Let them finish. Grant's mouth parted like he was about to say something. Instead, he looked at me, really looked, for the first time that evening. And that's when I saw it. He expected me to cry. To fall apart. To scream, maybe. But I didn't. I stood slowly, the silk of my black dress catching the candlelight. Well, I said, my voice calm, I guess that explains the business trips, and the new cologne. Lena blanched. Grant's face tensed. And Lena, I added, turning to her, now I understand why you insisted on that green dress. You wanted to make sure you matched the spotlight. The crowd shifted uneasily. Someone coughed. Another sip of champagne. No one knew what to say. I stepped forward, unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet Grant gave me for our 10th anniversary, and set it down on the white linen tablecloth beside the cake Lena had painstakingly selected. I'm not going to scream, I said. I'm not going to cry. Because tonight isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of yours. Lena's smile faltered. Grant looked like he wanted to reach out. Too late. You think this was clever, I continued. But you made one mistake. You taught me exactly where to hit you. And now, I will. I turned to the crowd. Thank you all for coming. Please, enjoy the dessert Lena worked so hard on. It would be a shame to let her efforts go to waste. Then, with the last shred of grace I had left, I walked out. Out of the restaurant. Out of my old life. And into something far colder, far stronger, than I ever thought myself capable of. The coastal wind bit my skin as I stepped onto the street, but I didn't shiver. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just walked. And in the silence, I began to think. Strategize. Breathe. They thought this was the climax. It wasn't. It was my prologue. By morning, I was a ghost. Not gone, just invisible. Social media. Deactivated. Shared accounts. Erased. I shut down the parts of me that made me traceable. I told no one where I was going. I rented a modest apartment under my mother's maiden name, far from the marble and glass of the life I had built. My phone buzzed. One text from my sister. Viv, are you okay? Please. Call me. I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and began the research. The real work. Because as a corporate lawyer, I knew exactly where to look. I knew all of Grant's passwords. His company structure. His most loyal clients. I knew Lena's real estate secrets, the hush-hush deals, the off-the-books favors, the exact language she used to skirt legality. I wasn't just his wife or her best friend. I was their biggest liability. And they'd just lit the match. Now. I was going to burn their world down, one carefully plotted strike at a time. It's amazing how quickly the world forgets a woman who doesn't perform her pain publicly. While Grant and Lena paraded their love like some torrid romance novel come to life, I became vapor, unseen, unheard, and unnoticed. That was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't disappear. I evolved. The first thing I did was create distance. Physical, digital, emotional. I packed what little I cared to keep, not the gifts, not the souvenirs from our romantic getaways, but the documents. Contracts, receipts, bank statements, deeds. Information. The kind of tools a woman like me could use to quietly dismantle lives. I moved into a small but private apartment in the Ashridge district, a quiet, tree-lined area known more for its aging professors and antique bookstores than scandal. I used a name no one had spoken aloud in years, my grandmother's surname, Roslyn. Vivienne Roslyn. No one would think to look for me there. I set up a new email under a pseudonym. I paid for everything in cash. I left my wedding ring in the bathroom of a gas station outside of town, dropped in the metal trash bin like the rotting symbol it was. Lena and Grant thought they had one. They thought my silence meant defeat. But silence is a weapon. The sharpest ones always are. Every morning, I went to work at the same law firm, hair pinned tight, heels clicking confidently down the marble halls. My colleagues eyed me like I was a ticking bomb. Not because they knew anything, but because I gave them nothing. No tears. No whispers in the break room. Just perfect posture, excellent briefs, and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Viv, you don't have to pretend," said my colleague, Jenna, during one late afternoon in the kitchenette. "If you want to talk." I smiled gently. "I appreciate that, Jenna. But I'm fine." I wasn't. But I would be. Because I had work to do. At night, my apartment transformed into a war room. Grant's law firm had secrets, the kind you don't talk about unless you want your license revoked. Over the years, I had seen the underbelly. Quiet settlements, misappropriated funds, silent investors who expected more than just dividends. He thought I wasn't paying attention. He was wrong. I started small. A series of anonymous tips sent to the city's business compliance office. Then to a watchdog group specializing in client transparency. I crafted each one like a love letter written in fire. They would ignite, eventually. And Lena. She was Messier. A woman like her survives on image and illusion. Her real estate empire was built on whispered promises and favors. So I followed the whispers. Dug into her deals. Posed as a luxury buyer interested in her newest property. I listened carefully when her assistant overshared during the sales pitch, a casual mention of questionable permit timing and rezoning shortcuts. I recorded everything. Not for blackmail. Not for court. For ruin. Social media is a weapon most people wield blindly. Lena posted a photo of herself and Grant, him in a pressed suit, her in a satin dress, captioned, "Love finds you when you least expect it." Disgusting. But also, enlightening. The location tag was an invite-only gala hosted by one of the city's top investors, someone I knew professionally. Someone with a strict code about who he did business with. I sent him an anonymous dossier about Lena's falsified valuations. Not enough to get her arrested. Just enough to make her radioactive. 2 weeks later, her name disappeared from his project website. My sister Claire called again. Then texted. "Viv, please. Let me help. You don't have to do this alone." But that's just it. I did. This wasn't about comfort or support. It wasn't about crying into a bottle of wine or binge-watching heartbreak comedies. This was about control. They'd taken it from me. Now, I was taking it back, piece by calculated piece. For weeks after the birthday betrayal, the first cracks showed. An article buried in the business section mentioned allegations of internal financial inconsistencies at Grant's firm. The language was mild. Intentional. But I knew it was a starting gun. A week later, Lena's name quietly dropped from a development deal on the west side of town. A building she'd bragged would be her crown jewel. The investors had backed out. How unfortunate. My transformation wasn't just professional. At home, I shed the remnants of who I had been. I replaced my wardrobe. No more silk wraps and pastel blouses. My new armor was tailored, sleek, deliberate. Black slacks. Sharp lines. A wardrobe designed not to seduce, but to command. I began attending networking events under my alias, not to schmooze, but to listen. To collect. To understand exactly where my enemies were vulnerable. It turned out, that was everywhere. Grant was overstretched. Trying to expand too fast. Too many clients. Too much trust in junior partners who weren't ready. Lena was even worse, burning through staff, ignoring due diligence, and relying too much on borrowed charm. They had built an empire on sand. And I had a shovel. One evening, while reviewing a recent property transaction, I noticed something peculiar. Lena had purchased a penthouse she was supposedly selling, through a shell company registered offshore. Money laundering. Not quite. But enough to raise questions. I made a call to a journalist I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman named Quinn, who had once investigated nonprofit fraud. She hated Grant. I gave her a breadcrumb. Don't quote me, I said. But there's something odd in the Hamilton Tower deal. Look at the tax flow. She found it. And she ran with it. The story didn't name Lena directly. But it named the building. And once the whispers start, they don't stop. I wasn't reckless. I was surgical. Every move I made had purpose. Precision. Timing. By the end of month 2, Grant's firm was under audit. Lena's properties were under review. The cracks had become fractures. And yet, they still smiled for the cameras. Still hosted brunches. Still posted loved-up selfies like they were the new power couple. How adorable. They didn't realize the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. By the 3rd month, Grant's name was removed from the firm's marketing materials. No explanation. Just gone. I knew why. I had made sure internal partners received a bundle of documents detailing his oversight, or rather, his lack of it, on a multi-million-dollar estate settlement. They couldn't risk keeping him as their public face. Lena's assistant? Gone. Quietly let go. But I found her, working at a co-working space across town. I scheduled a coaching session with her under another name. And when she showed up, I didn't confront her. I listened. She told me everything. Every off-the-record deal. Every verbal agreement. Every sketchy valuation. All the things she had quietly kept notes on. I paid her a consulting fee. And walked away with a file thick enough to sink Lena's entire career. The satisfaction was quiet. Cold. But real. They had laughed. Toasted their love. Betrayed me with a spotlight and a smirk. But now, they were being erased. And no one could trace it back to me. Not yet. Not ever. It began with a whisper, and ended with a roar. By the start of the 4th month, the city's elite no longer whispered about Lena Mercer's elegance or Grant Hale's legal brilliance. They whispered about missing money. Shady permits. Suspended projects. Closed-door meetings. Headlines stopped printing praise and began publishing warnings. Their downfall wasn't sudden. It was surgical. And every cut came from a blade I'd been sharpening in silence. The first public blow landed on a Wednesday. A former investor of Lena's filed a civil suit alleging breach of contract and misrepresentation of value. The development in question was the Easton Residences, a tower she had called her flagship. But according to the suit, Lena had inflated the value of the property with falsified market comps and manipulated appraisals. It was no longer an anonymous rumor. It was public record. I was sitting at a small cafe across town when I saw the headline scroll across my phone, * real estate starlet faces legal battle over fraudulent claims. *. Starlet. What a word. They'd once called her a visionary. I watched her fall from vision to villain in less than 3 paragraphs. Grant wasn't faring much better. The audit I had sparked at his firm unearthed a tangled web of unethical billing, conflicts of interest, and undisclosed partnerships. He tried to claim ignorance, that it was a rogue junior associate, that he had been focused on big-picture leadership. But the Bar Association doesn't like leaders who ignore rules. The whispers became louder when he withdrew from a major case he'd previously boasted about. His name was missing from press releases. Rumors swirled. Then the real blow came. Grant Hale's license was placed under official review. And I hadn't even released the worst of what I had. Not yet. My phone buzzed that evening with a message from Claire. *, is this you? Asterisk. Attached was a screenshot of Lena and Grant arguing on the sidewalk outside her high-rise condo. Her face was tight with fury. His was red, jaw clenched. Paparazzi had caught them mid-fight. She was accusing him of leaking documents. He was accusing her of sinking his career. Neither of them suspected the truth. I was the ghost in their system. The glitch in their empire. The virus they'd invited into their own celebration. The penthouse they shared, the one Lena had bought suspiciously fast after her divorce, went up for sale quietly. A pocket listing. No public announcements. But I had contacts. A friend in luxury real estate texted me, asterisk, you'll never believe who's trying to unload their overpriced ego nest. Asterisk. I smiled and replied, asterisk, let me guess. Green marble kitchen, skyline views, and a wine cellar no one uses. Asterisk. He texted back one word, asterisk, bingo. Asterisk. They were bleeding assets. Because they were hemorrhaging credibility. Then came the exposé. Quinn, the journalist I'd fed breadcrumbs to, published a piece titled asterisk, The Illusion of Power, When Charm Becomes Currency. Asterisk. The article was brutal. It never used Lena or Grant's names directly. But it didn't have to. Everyone in the city's professional scene knew exactly who the real estate mogul turned persona non grata, and the charismatic attorney with a crumbling reputation, referred to. Quinn had done her job well. She had cross-referenced transactions, timelines, and client testimonies. The piece made waves, not in tabloids, but in investor circles, law firms, and political backrooms. The damage was far more dangerous than gossip. It was financial. Lena lost 3 major clients in 48 hours. Grant received a letter from one of his longest-standing partners severing all ties, effective immediately. I wasn't just destroying their public image. I was cutting off their air supply. They tried to recover. Lena gave an interview to a mid-tier lifestyle blog, positioning herself as a woman under siege, claiming jealousy and sexism were fueling attacks on her business. The comments section was savage. You misled people. Maybe don't steal your best friend's husband next time. Your foundation never donated the money it promised. Where did it go? She tried deleting it all. But the internet never forgets. 1 week later, Grant was spotted at a charity auction, alone. No Lena. He looked thinner. The perfectly tailored suits had been replaced by something slightly wrinkled. He still smiled, the same PR-polished expression, but there was something brittle behind it. I watched from across the room, standing with a group of executives I once only dreamed of impressing. Now they laughed at my jokes, sought my opinion. One of them nudged me and whispered, "Is that Hale?" Poor guy. What a mess. I heard he might lose his license. I shrugged and sipped my champagne. Actions have consequences, I said. The consequences kept coming. Lena's foundation, the one she used to tout as her real passion project, was exposed for gross financial mismanagement. Donors demanded refunds. Local news picked it up. She was summoned for a compliance hearing. I didn't attend. But I watched the live stream. She wore a beige pantsuit, makeup minimal. She looked tired. Cornered. There was no designer glow. Just a woman unraveling. The camera zoomed in as she struggled to answer where funds had gone. When pressed, she muttered, "It was all Lena. Just Lena. I trusted the wrong people." A lie. She was the wrong people. Meanwhile, Grant's firm was imploding. Associates resigned. Clients left. The firm's name, once on downtown billboards and courthouse steps, was replaced by newcomers eager to capitalize on the vacuum. A former partner leaked an internal email chain suggesting Grant had instructed junior staff to cut corners for efficiency. The Bar Association flagged it as evidence. And I still hadn't released the most damning document, a memo he'd written himself, approving a deal he'd publicly denied knowledge of. I was saving that for later. They fought each other now. No more brunches. No more events. No more carefully coordinated Instagram posts. The perfect couple had turned into a liability for each other. She ruined my life, Grant allegedly told a colleague during a drunken outburst. She pushed me to go public. Told me Vivienne would fold. But I didn't fold. I multiplied. My work had become sharper. Cleaner. Clients respected me in ways they never had before. Some even whispered I had a ruthless elegance they admired. They had no idea. Not really. But they respected power. And that's what I had now. One night, I walked past a restaurant Grant and I used to frequent. Through the window, I saw him, sitting at the bar, alone, stirring a drink he hadn't touched. His phone sat face up on the table. No notifications. I kept walking. He didn't see me. But I saw everything. The loneliness. The weight. The knowledge. He knew I was the reason. And he couldn't stop it. Because I was never just his wife. I was the one who made him. And now, I was the one who would unmake him, completely. It's strange how revenge becomes routine. In the beginning, it was fire. Hot, urgent, consuming. But by the 4th month, it had turned into something else, colder, quieter. A process. A system. A machine I'd built, maintained, and improved with each passing week. Every whisper planted. Every email leaked. Every phone call recorded. And now, I was ready to unleash the next phase. Because while Lena and Grant were busy clawing at each other, trying to salvage their reputations, I was orchestrating the collapse of everything they hadn't even thought to protect. Their future. It started with the clients. I compiled a private dossier, a 50-page document complete with time-stamped emails, doctored invoices, and contract discrepancies, and delivered it anonymously to the city's top investigative business podcast. They'd been looking into unethical real estate trends for months. My file gave them exactly what they needed. The following Monday, a new episode dropped. Beneath the marble, the real cost of the Easton deal. They didn't name names, but the evidence was undeniable. It was Lena's voice in one of the recordings. It was Grant's signature on the leaked contracts. It took less than 48 hours for the podcast to go viral. And just like that, they couldn't hide anymore. I still hadn't spoken to either of them. Not a text. Not an email. Not even a "you'll regret this." That was the most delicious part. They didn't know how much I knew. Or how deep I was willing to go. That fear, the uncertainty, was worth more than 1,000 confrontations. Because nothing rattles a narcissist like silence. Lena tried damage control. She hosted a transparency brunch, yes, that was the name, for select clients and press. A photographer I knew slipped me pictures. Only 8 people showed up. Half of them were there for the free food. She looked hollow in the photos. The tight bun, the pale blouse, the carefully posed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The woman who once captivated rooms with a single glance now looked like she was clinging to an identity that no longer existed. One guest described the event to me later as a funeral in heels. I couldn't have written it better myself. Grant, meanwhile, had retreated behind walls of lawyers. He issued a public statement through a PR firm, something about legal complications and standing strong during professional adversity. The local bar association issued an interim suspension the same week. A legal blog ran a piece, asterisk, from power to pariah, the fall of Vivienne Hale. Asterisk. They used his old headshot, the one I took during a firm retreat in Napa, back when I still thought I knew who he was. Now his smile looked haunting. Like a mask beginning to rot. Claire begged me to stop. "Viv," she said one night on the phone, "you've won. They're done. People are actually scared of you now." "I'm not done," I replied, pouring tea in the quiet calm of my apartment. "This isn't about fear. It's about truth. About consequences." She sighed. "I just don't want you to lose yourself." But that's the thing, I wasn't losing myself. I was finding her. The version of Vivienne Hale who didn't compromise. Who didn't tolerate betrayal, manipulation, or disrespect. The woman they thought they buried under that birthday cake was alive. And she had names to cross off. The final strike came from an unlikely place. Lena's former assistant, the one I had quietly paid for information, reached out to me. She was scared. Not because of me, but because Lena had contacted her through a burner phone, begging her to retract statements she'd never made publicly. "She's unraveling," the assistant told me. "I think she's afraid you're not done." "She's right," I said. "I'm not." The assistant hesitated. Then offered something I hadn't expected. A USB drive. "I kept copies," she whispered. "Emails. Messages. Even a video of her bragging about destroying Viv before she even knew what hit her. I never meant to be part of that." I took the drive and thanked her. I didn't tell her what I was going to do with it. But I already knew. I waited 1 week. I let Grant's legal suspension become permanent. I let Lena lose another 2 investors and receive a subpoena for financial misrepresentation. Then, I released the video, not to the public, but to her network. A carefully curated list of realtors, lawyers, investors, board members, and old clients. The subject line of the email read, "Just so you know who you're really working with." No commentary. No threats. Just the file. Within 2 days, Lena was removed from the board of her own company. Her business partner, someone she'd once called her ride or die, issued a statement distancing the firm from all unethical behavior of former leadership. Her face disappeared from the company website. Just a black and white logo remained, cold and faceless. Like her. I watched the chaos unfold from my balcony. I didn't cheer. I didn't drink champagne. I just exhaled. Deeply. Completely. Because for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was chasing justice. I had delivered it. Later that evening, I received a text from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I opened it. "You win. I hope you're proud." That was all it said. I didn't reply. Because this was never a game. It was a reckoning. And I wasn't proud. I was peaceful. There's a difference. I always thought noise was the enemy. Shouting matches. Public betrayals. Doors slammed and plates shattered. But silence, real silence, is so much heavier. It doesn't scream. It lingers. It fills the cracks. It seeps into the parts of you that used to hum with hope. After Lena's company formally removed her, after Grant's license was stripped indefinitely, the city around them didn't explode in scandalous gossip. It went quiet. They were erased not with fury, but with absence. And absence is a brutal kind of revenge. The social invitations stopped first. The couple who once graced every gala, every opening, every wine tasting, now ghosted. Their names vanished from seating charts. Their RSVP cards returned unopened. Friends they once considered untouchable began issuing quiet statements, asterisk, we had no idea. We wish them healing. Asterisk. Healing. How polite. How useless. Because I knew they weren't healing. They were drowning. I kept tabs, but from a distance. I didn't need to watch the train wreck. I had engineered the tracks. Grant moved into a one-bedroom rental in a bland building on the outskirts of the city. A friend of a friend lived 3 doors down. She told me his lights stayed off most nights. That he started smoking again. That he barely left the apartment except for groceries. Lena tried harder. At first, she attempted to pivot, rebrand herself as a consultant for rising female entrepreneurs. But her reputation was radioactive. No one wanted to be the next victim of the Mercer effect. She downgraded to a smaller condo. Quiet neighborhood. Fewer eyes. But eyes still found her. She was seen at a boutique downtown, returning half a dozen items. Then at a networking brunch where she wasn't on the list. She tried to smile through it. To charm. To shine. But no one wanted her sparkle anymore. It had been dulled by truth. Claire visited me more often now. She brought flowers. Coffee. Sometimes just silence and a presence. One afternoon, as we sat on my balcony, she said, "People talk about you." I looked up. Good things. Mostly, she smirked. Some say you're terrifying. Others say you're brilliant. But everyone agrees on one thing. I waited. That you changed. I sipped my tea. Did I? She didn't answer right away. Then, yes. But I think it's the kind of change that happens when the world tries to break you, and you refuse. I smiled. That's not change. That's becoming. One night, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, curiosity or cruelty, I'll never know, said yes. Vivienne. I knew that voice. Lena. It had softened. Stripped of pride, vanity, arrogance. It was the voice of someone clinging to dignity with fraying fingers. I'm not calling to beg, she said quickly. I needed to say it out loud. Say what? I'm sorry. There it was. Too late. Too thin. But there. I said nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. I just wanted you to know. I think about what I did every day. What I lost. What I destroyed. And I know I'll never get it back. You're right, I said. You won't. I miss who we were, she whispered. We were never who you think we were. Silence again. Heavy. Honest. I guess I called because I needed to hear your voice. Even if it hated me. I don't hate you, Lena, I said. She exhaled, almost relieved. Then I added, I pity you. She hung up. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. Grant didn't call. He wrote. A letter arrived weeks later, no return address. Handwritten. Pages of regret, memories, confusion. He said he'd lost himself. That he believed he and Lena were in love. That he convinced himself I would understand eventually. That was the most insulting part. His belief that I was capable of understanding betrayal as an accident. I didn't reply. Because I didn't owe him closure. Closure is earned, not requested after destruction. My life was quiet now. Not hollow. Just intentional. I worked with clients who respected me. Built new friendships. Reclaimed old ones that had faded during my marriage. I traveled. Ate alone at expensive restaurants without shame. I laughed more. Read more. Thought more. And I stopped checking their profiles. Because there was nothing left to see. They tried to rebuild, separately. Grant launched a small legal consulting gig, offering services to struggling startups. He pitched it as a redemption arc. Some bought it. Most didn't. Lena tried writing a blog. She framed herself as a survivor of professional sabotage. The comments were brutal. Her attempt to be seen as the wounded bird backfired. Because people don't forget snakes in silk. They just wait for them to shed their skin again. The weight of silence is this. It lets people sit with their choices. It gives them space to see what they truly are. And some of them, like Grant and Lena, don't like the reflection. They tried to control the narrative. But I took away their audience. That's the kind of revenge no headline ever captures. The kind where the punishment is having to live with who you really are, with no one left to clap for you. One day, I walked past the restaurant where they'd ruined my birthday. It had reopened under a new name. New chef. New decor. But the windows were the same. I looked in, half expecting to see them there. Laughing. Toasting. Rewriting history. But there were just strangers. Living. Smiling. Moving on. And I realized something. So was I. It was Claire who first brought up the idea of legacy. Not in the grand, dramatic sense of monuments or memoirs, but something quieter, simpler. You've dismantled everything they built, she said one evening as we walked along the riverside, autumn leaves skimming across the pavement. But what are you building, Viv? I didn't answer immediately. Because I hadn't thought about that. For months, my life had been defined by removal, the pulling of threads, the collapsing of facades, the unveiling of masks. I had become so good at subtraction, I forgot about addition. But the question lingered. And when I returned home that night to the silence of my apartment, I sat by the window and asked myself, what comes after revenge? I started small. Donated the last of Lena's abandoned designer handbags, the ones she left in the storage unit Grant had stopped paying for, to a women's shelter across town. I didn't leave my name. Didn't tell them who they once belonged to. Because none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the woman who picked one up the next morning and walked into her job interview standing a little taller. It felt right. Like exhaling after months of holding my breath. Then came the letters. 2 of them. Both handwritten. One from Lena's mother. And one from Grant's younger brother, Daniel. Lena's mother, a stern woman with silver hair and unflinching eyes, had once adored me. She wrote simply. I raised my daughter to be strong, not cruel. I'm sorry for what she became. You didn't deserve it. Please know not all of us share her shame. I stared at the letter for a long time before tucking it away in a drawer I rarely opened. Daniel's was more raw. He described how their family had imploded. How Grant's parents had gone into hiding socially. How clients had pulled out of partnerships with his tech startup just because he shared the same last name. I've always admired you, he wrote. Even more now. You did what no one else could, you held them accountable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just understanding. That word again. Understanding. Everyone wanted it. No one had offered it to me when I was the one bleeding in public. But I understood one thing. Actions echo. And what we build in the ruins matters more than what we destroy. That's when the idea began to form. An initiative. A trust. A space for women rebuilding after betrayal, not just romantic, but professional, familial, financial. I called it the Inheritance Project. Not because it offered money, but because it offered something we all deserve to inherit: dignity, direction, and a way forward. I assembled a board, quiet powerhouses from my network. Lawyers, therapists, financial planners, survivors. We built workshops, microgrants, legal aid partnerships. It started as a pilot, then grew. Because women talk. And when they talk, they rise, together. At one of our early sessions, a woman named Eliza shared her story. Married for 22 years. Left with debt. Children. A house mortgaged twice. Her husband had vanished to Bali with a yoga instructor half his age. I thought about driving off a bridge, she admitted through tears. But then I found this program. And for the first time, someone gave a damn. I sat with her after everyone left. Gave her the number of a property lawyer I trusted. Covered her initial consult fees myself. She squeezed my hand and said, "I didn't know women like you existed." I smiled. "We do," I said. "We're just quiet until we need to roar." Meanwhile, the ghosts of my past tried, weekly, to haunt me. Lena attempted to start a new venture. A YouTube channel about reclaiming life after loss. The comments section was a minefield. Every story she tried to tell was met with truth from those she'd burned. Former clients. Assistants. Even family members. She disabled comments eventually. Then deleted the channel. Grant applied to teach at a community college, a law ethics course, of all things. The board rejected him quietly. They never gave a reason. But I knew someone on the board. He'd attended one of my private roundtable events on accountability and leadership. He remembered everything I said. Especially the part about smiling liars. My name was being spoken in circles I once only dreamed of entering. Not because of scandal, but because of results. CEOs invited me to speak on resilience. Editorials asked for op-eds. A publisher in New York sent a proposal for a memoir. I declined. Not because I didn't have a story, but because the story was still being written. And it wasn't just mine anymore. Claire hosted dinner for our family that winter. It was the first time in years we'd all been in one place without tension. She poured wine and leaned over. "You're glowing," she said. "I'm exhausted," I replied honestly. "But you're you," she said. Again. I thought about that. Had I returned to who I was before? No. I had become someone new. Not a victim. Not a vindictive ghost. But a woman who had learned that rock bottom isn't the end. It's the beginning, if you decide to build something on it. Late one night, I sat in my office, overlooking the city. Emails buzzed. Numbers climbed. Praise flowed. But none of it compared to the silence. Not the heavy kind from before. The peaceful kind. The kind that hums with balance. Outside my window, lights flickered in offices and apartments. Lives unfolded, some shattering, some healing. Mine had done both. And out of that fracture, I had forged something real. I didn't need a headline. Or an apology. Or a standing ovation. I just needed to know that when women looked up and saw my name, they saw a blueprint. Not for revenge. But for reclamation. For becoming. For survival that didn't look like scars, but strategy. Something to inherit. The building was familiar. Too familiar. It was the old boardroom of Lennox and Maverne, one of the city's most prestigious real estate conglomerates. A place I had never stepped foot in, but had heard of, always in whispers, always in connection to Lena Mercer. It was once her trophy. Her name had been on the plaque in the marble hallway. Her portrait had hung in the reception, next to the founders. She had hosted champagne parties in the rooftop garden and held press conferences from the wood-paneled conference room with the skyline as her backdrop. But now, as I walked through those same glass doors, her name was gone. Literally removed. No plaque. No portrait. Not even a trace on the digital directory. And I wasn't here as a guest. I was here as a speaker. The invitation came from the new executive director of Lennox and Maverne, a woman named Eleanor Parrish, sharp, cool-toned, early 40s, and very aware of what power should look like and who should wield it. She had followed my work with the Inheritance Project. I believe, she'd said during our first phone call, that some institutions need to burn before they can evolve. You clearly understand the flame. It was the kind of compliment you frame, not in a frame, but in your chest. Now here I was. Walking into the same room Lena had once ruled. Only now, she was a footnote in someone else's warning manual. The conference was private, 20 hand-picked professionals, all women in leadership, all battle-tested. The room buzzed with quiet intelligence. And I was the keynote. I spoke not of betrayal, or revenge, or names. But about rebuilding from ash. About what it means to be underestimated, dismissed, betrayed, and still rise, not in spite of it, but because of it. I saw nods. Tears. Even applause. But what struck me most was the stillness afterward. That sacred pause after truth has been spoken, before the world exhales again. In that silence, I felt it. Lena's ghost leaving the room. Not in death. But in obsolescence. After the session, Eleanor pulled me aside. We were never friends, she said bluntly. Lena and I. She thought I was small. Background. You know the type. I nodded. I do. She tried to undercut my promotion twice, she continued. Told the board I was too soft. That I wouldn't last a year. How long's it been? I asked. 3, she smiled. And I'm just getting started. I liked her immediately. Eleanor led me to the rooftop garden, the one Lena used to use as a stage. It was quieter now. No photographers. No clinking glasses. Just a skyline and a breeze. She left behind a lot of rot, Eleanor said. But we've been clearing it. Slowly. Carefully. I understood. Sometimes the cleanup is more important than the demolition. Because what you plant in that soil next, that's legacy. Later that week, I walked through the city's central gallery. An exhibit had just opened, * Women Who Rebuilt. * Photographs. Letters. Testimonials. And there, in the back corner, away from the main lights, framed in oak, was a small piece of parchment. A quote. No name. It read, * They tried to ruin me in front of a crowd. I rebuild quietly in front of no one. And now they no longer get to sit at any table I've built. * I stood there for a long time. It wasn't mine. I hadn't submitted it. But someone had heard my story, or one like it, and made space for it. It didn't need attribution. It needed air. Truth always finds its way into the room. One morning, I received a text from a former client of Lena's. A woman I hadn't spoken to in years. She had once dismissed me at a dinner party as too by the book. Now she wrote. * You were right. About her. About all of it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. If you ever need support, I owe you. * I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Not out of spite. But because validation that arrives late isn't for the past. It's for the future. Lena resurfaced briefly. A whispered mention in a blog post. A sighting at a wellness retreat upstate. A new Instagram account that tried to frame her journey as transformational. But it never landed. The algorithm had moved on. So had the city. So had I. She had become exactly what she feared most, irrelevant. And Grant? He'd taken a job 2 towns over, legal clerk, hourly pay. Rumor had it he drove a used sedan and lived in a complex that didn't allow pets or noise after 8 p.m. He used to dream of courtside seats and summer homes in the French Riviera. Now he dreamt, probably, of silence. Of not being recognized in grocery stores. Of starting over where no one knew his name. I often wondered if they still talked. Not about me, they were done with that. But about themselves. About how it all went wrong. And if, in those quiet conversations, they ever admitted the truth. That the moment they chose to humiliate me publicly, was the moment they lit the match that burned everything they had. And me? I was still building. Not from rage. Not even from justice. But from knowing. Knowing that nothing is sweeter than walking into a room that once belonged to your enemy, and realizing they no longer belong anywhere. Not because you pushed them out. But because they removed themselves the moment they mistook your silence for weakness. That's the room with her name removed. And mine written in ink that doesn't fade. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable by every outward measure. Clouds hung low over the city skyline. The air smelled faintly of concrete and cold metal, the way it does before rain. I had just stepped out of a breakfast meeting when it happened. A breeze picked up, light but oddly decisive. As if the wind itself had made a choice. I paused on the steps of the Lexington Hotel, coffee in hand, and for the first time in over a year, I felt it. Not power. Not control. Not even satisfaction. But peace. Real, quiet, sobering peace. Like the war was finally over. The night before, I'd burned something. An old folder, the last physical relic of the life I left behind. It contained printed emails, screenshots, photos, and scribbled notes from the months I'd spent gathering ammunition. Pages that had once made my heart race. Names that once set my teeth on edge. I watched the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace. Not out of hate. But because I no longer needed proof. Everyone already knew. And more importantly, I no longer cared that they did. The news of Lena's bankruptcy filing broke 2 days earlier. Quietly. No headlines. Just a legal update on a financial site that few would notice unless they were looking. I wasn't looking. A friend sent me the link with no commentary. I read it once, closed the tab, and went back to my meeting agenda. Lena Mercer had gone from the city's golden girl to a cautionary tale whispered behind champagne flutes. But I didn't toast. There was no celebration in her fall. Because her downfall wasn't my destination. It was the detour. Grant was seen at a community fundraiser recently. Helping set up folding chairs. Someone sent me a blurry photo, his back turned, sleeves rolled up. I stared at it for a moment, trying to place the feeling in my chest. It wasn't pity. Or triumph. It was detachment. A ghost of recognition with no home to haunt. He looked smaller. Not just in frame, but in presence. The man who once commanded courtrooms and rooms full of admirers now melted into the background. Exactly where he had sent me that night, on my birthday. Funny how balance finds its way back. At the Inheritance Project, things were moving faster than I expected. We had secured our first multi-year partnership with a corporate sponsor. Our second location was opening in the spring. A small team of volunteers had grown into a full staff, driven, compassionate, fierce. One of our beneficiaries, Marla, had recently won custody of her children back from an abusive ex. She'd been sleeping in her car when we met her. Now she had a job. An apartment. A plan. "You saved my life," she said during her exit interview. "No," I told her gently. "You saved it. I just reminded you where to look." That moment stayed with me. Because somewhere along the way, that's exactly what I'd done for myself too. I still walked past certain places out of habit. The bookstore where Lena and I used to sip overpriced tea while pretending we read anything more than the front covers. The park bench where Grant once held my hand and told me he couldn't imagine life without me. They were no longer painful. They were just places. Empty stages from a play that had closed long ago. People moved past me now without recognition. The whispers had faded. The eyes no longer followed. And in that quiet, I found room to breathe again. Room to dream of things that had nothing to do with revenge. That Tuesday afternoon, after finishing my appointments, I drove to the coast. No plans. No meetings. Just me. The sea was choppy that day, not angry, just honest. The kind of waves that remind you you're small, but also alive. I kicked off my shoes and stood at the water's edge. It was cold. Sharp. Real. I closed my eyes and let the wind wrap around me. And that's when I felt it again, that shift. That internal turning. The ache had lifted. Not because I had moved on, but because I had finally laid it down. All of it. The betrayal. The humiliation. The endless hunger for control. I didn't need it anymore. Because the woman they had tried to break was no longer made of glass. She was forged. Refined. Whole. When I returned home that evening, I found a letter waiting at my door. No name on the envelope. No return address. Just my name in simple handwriting. Inside was a card, thick paper, elegant penmanship. 4 words. Asterisk, thank you for everything. Asterisk. No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew it was from someone who had watched. Learned. Survived. Someone whose name I might never know, but whose life I had touched simply by refusing to stay broken. It was the most powerful thank you I had ever received. Later that night, I opened my windows. Let the breeze in. Lit a candle. And pulled out a fresh notebook, its pages still crisp, untouched. Not for strategy. Not for targets. Not for any war. But for ideas. Hopes. Possibilities. I wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. Asterisk, now we build. Asterisk. The day the wind changed wasn't marked by fanfare or final blows. It was marked by choice. The choice to stop looking backward. And start writing a life that didn't require an enemy to feel full. A life that didn't include Lena or Grant, not in victory or vengeance, but in absence. And in that silence, finally, I smiled without armor. Grief wears many faces. Most people think of it as tears, as aching loneliness, as curled up bodies in the dark. And yes, sometimes, it's that. But other times, grief is quieter. It's the moment you see a scarf in the back of your closet and remember the woman who once helped you pick it out, before you realize she was digging the ground from beneath your feet. It's the blink of recognition when a passing scent reminds you of a man who once knew your dreams, before he sold them out in public applause. It's the ache of memory with no invitation, a phantom limb you stop noticing until something brushes against it. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the sound of everything missing. I began to sort through the boxes. Literal ones. After nearly 2 years of rebuilding, I decided it was time to empty the last remnants of storage I had ignored. Items from the life I left behind, boxed up in a climate-controlled unit on the edge of the city. Grant's handwriting still marked the outside of a few. Summer clothes, Viv. Kitchen stuff, fragile. Photos. That one stopped me. Photos. I debated not opening it. Letting it stay sealed. Letting the dust finish the work I had started. But closure has a strange appetite. And I was hungry for truth, even in old frames. Inside, there were albums I hadn't touched since our honeymoon. Smiling faces on boats, beaches, balconies. Posed dinners. Candid laughs. The illusion of happiness printed on glossy paper. But it was more than just him. There was Lena too. She filled entire pages. Birthday brunches. Holiday parties. Spa weekends. And me, always beside her, arms linked, heads tilted together. Two women who had once shared everything. Except loyalty. I flipped through the photos, not with sadness, but with curiosity, like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of a civilization she once helped build. We had loved each other, in our way. That was the hardest part to admit. Because betrayal is easiest to hate when it's clean. When it comes from villains. But when it comes from people you once adored. That's a different kind of pain. One that doesn't bleed. It just bruises, slowly, forever. I kept 3 photos. One of me alone, laughing on a rooftop with a glass of champagne. One of Claire and me as kids, covered in mud from a backyard misadventure. And one of my mother, sitting at the piano, her hands mid-air, frozen between notes. I didn't keep anything else. Everything else went into the shred bin. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed those fragments. They weren't mine anymore. They belonged to another woman. A woman who believed loyalty was unconditional. Who confused silence for strength. Who thought she had to earn love by making herself small. I honored her. Then I let her go. Claire met me for dinner that night. She noticed the change immediately. "You're lighter," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You did something." "What was it?" "Let go," I replied simply. "Of them?" "Of her," I said. "The old me." She nodded slowly, tears pooling but not falling. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed me too." We clinked glasses, not to revenge, not to war, but to return. To rediscovery. To peace. That weekend, I visited my parents' old house. It had been sold years ago, but the park behind it remained. There, beneath the same crooked willow tree where I once read books as a child, I sat alone and let the wind speak. It told me stories of a girl who dreamed big. Who asked questions no one answered. Who stood up when others didn't. That girl had never gone away. She had just been buried, beneath obligation, politeness, love twisted into currency. But now, she was awake again. Taller. Tougher. And finally, free. I didn't visit Grant's grave. He wasn't dead, of course. But the version of him that mattered, the man I married, had long since been laid to rest. I didn't need to mourn him in the traditional sense. I had already done that, at my birthday party, when he chose applause over honesty. That night was the funeral. Everything after had been my resurrection. As for Lena, I heard she left the city. Sold what little remained. Moved somewhere coastal. Tried to disappear. A mutual acquaintance said she was living under a new name, working in retail. Quiet. Polite. Dull. Like someone who knows she can't afford to make noise anymore, the acquaintance added. I didn't comment. I didn't feel anything. That was the power of healing, it made her irrelevant. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. Just unnecessary. One afternoon, while working at the foundation, I received a package. No return label. No card. Inside was a copy of a book. Women Who Run with the Wolves. A red ribbon marked a single chapter. I smiled. Lena had once given me this book in our 20s, scrawled something like, "You're stronger than you think," on the inside cover. That original copy had long been lost in one of our many moves. Now it had returned to me, anonymously, silently. I didn't know if it was from her. But I placed it on my shelf anyway. Not as a reminder of her, but as a reminder of the fire I stepped through. And the woman who walked out. That evening, I stood on my balcony and wrote in my notebook again. The same one I'd started after the wind changed. This time, I wrote. I don't miss them. I miss who I was before I believed I needed them. That's what I had left behind. Not just two people, but the false life they convinced me I deserved. And in their place, I had found something no betrayal could touch. Myself. Whole. Rooted. Reclaimed. Revenge stories always end with something explosive, a courtroom confession, a public collapse, a final confrontation with the villain trembling before you. But my ending didn't come with noise. It came with stillness. The kind of stillness that arrives when there is nothing left to take, nothing more to say, and no one else to prove anything to. That was the day I realized. The most powerful revenge is not destruction. It's disappearance. Not yours, theirs. From your mind. Your heart. Your story. I stood in front of a full-length mirror in my new apartment, far from the penthouse that once held echoes of another life. There were no gold accents. No sweeping skyline views. Just hardwood floors, linen curtains, and light. Real light. I had changed. Not into someone new, but into someone real. Someone no longer performing forgiveness or power. Someone simply living. The Inheritance Project had expanded to 3 cities. Our team now included survivors who had once walked through our doors with nothing but shame and a plastic grocery bag. Now they wore blazers. Gave speeches. Helped others heal. I didn't stand in front of them as a queen on a throne. I sat beside them, a builder among architects. Every time I watched one of them reclaim their voice, I felt it. A victory louder than applause. Quieter than peace. Deeper than revenge. One evening, I was invited to a closed panel at the university, a talk about resilience, business ethics, and the power of narrative. I hesitated at first. The moderator, a young adjunct who happened to be Grant's former mentee. He had emailed me directly, politely, cautiously. "I know the history," he wrote. "But I also know the impact you've made. The students would gain more from hearing your story than from any textbook I could assign." I almost said no. But then I remembered, history isn't owned by the people who hurt you. It's rewritten by the ones who outlived them. The auditorium wasn't full. But the energy was real. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from notes. I didn't dress for armor. I spoke from the place that had once been broken. About betrayal. Collapse. Reinvention. About the quiet power of starting again. At the end, someone asked, "What would you say to the people who hurt you, if you could?" The room held its breath. And I smiled, a real one. "Nothing," I said. Because I no longer speak in their direction. A hush fell. Then a thunder of applause. Not because of drama, but because of clarity. That night, I received a text from Claire. She'd been watching the live stream. Asterisk, that smile was different, she wrote. It wasn't a weapon. It was yours. Asterisk. I stared at her message for a long moment. Then replied. Asterisk, it always was. I just had to reclaim it. Asterisk. Months later, I walked past a cafe where I once saw Grant and Lena laughing behind a window, just days before the betrayal. The space was different now. A new owner. A fresh coat of paint. Different name. But the window remained. And for the first time, I walked in. Not to rewrite the memory, but to let it fade. I sat by the same glass, ordered tea, and opened a novel I'd been meaning to finish for years. No ghosts came. No echoes followed. Just a breeze through the open door and the taste of chamomile and honey. Outside, the world moved on. So did I. But I didn't forget the storm. I just stopped letting it define the season. Lena's name never returned to the city's real estate listings. Grant never earned back his license. They weren't pariahs. Just irrelevant. And that is what I gifted them. Irrelevance. Not by shouting them down, but by living louder in silence. Somewhere, I imagine, they still talk about me. Maybe in bitterness. Maybe in guilt. Maybe in twisted nostalgia. But I no longer care what my name tastes like in their mouths. Because in mine, it tastes like strength. Like freedom. Like soil that grows something new. And the last word I'll never say. It isn't forgiveness. It isn't goodbye. It's enough. Because I don't need them to hear it. I just needed to become it. Whole. Unshaken. Untouchable. When I close the final page of this chapter, I won't look back. I won't revisit the day I was humiliated. I won't dwell on the faces that failed me. I will turn to the next page, fresh and blank. And write something entirely new. Because revenge isn't the ending. It's the comma. The pause before you finally say, now watch who I become.